Greetings everybody. It's not usual for me to do a video sat here in my playroom, but we're still in lockdown here in the UK, so can't get out and I can't go and create more content. So unfortunately my face is what you're going to have to contend with. Now I'm going to steal an idea from Chris Sale. For those of you who don't know, Chris is a very talented landscape photographer who turned professional last year, and Chris is in the same boat as me. Chris is also not able to go out, so I think he stole this idea from somebody else actually, but Chris talked about his landscape photography journey, a kind of a mixture of approach and kit, but it's something that I get asked a lot when I do talks at camera clubs and so forth, is where have I come from in terms of kit, why have I chosen certain bits of kit. So that's what I'm going to do today for you. There will be some pictures and some images, some of which you'll have never seen before, so enjoy. Right, let's go right back to the beginning. So photography for me started as being a bit of a gimmick, a bit of a challenge as well. I am, anybody who knows me very well will know that I am a massive Star Wars fan, have been since the movie came out, and I used to build model kits. I used to try and make my own model kits as well, and photography initially was just about trying to capture pictures of my kits or my models looking as if they had been, you know, taken in the movie Star Wars. So things like one of these, for instance, for those of you who don't know, this is an X-Wing from the movie. So I would try and, you know, capture these things in neat poses with star fields behind them and things like that. And my chosen weapon of choice was a very early birthday present, and I don't have it anymore unfortunately, but it was, and I'm going to hang my head in shame here, it was a Boots disc camera. You can't get them anymore. I was going to say it's a horrible thing. It wasn't actually. It was a very, very good bit of kit, but the films were, or the negatives were, absolutely abysmal, arranged in a disc, hence the name, with negatives about the size of my fingernail, really, really grainy pictures, and I could never get close enough to my fancy models to be able to take decent pictures of them, and I could never light them properly because all I had was my desk lamp and a torch, but I thoroughly enjoyed using it. Very reliable until it broke, but that was my start. My next camera was a 16th birthday present and a little bit more robust, and I have still got it, which is my Olympus OM10. Now I wouldn't say I predominantly use this for landscapes. I actually tried to use it to capture pictures of birds, but I could never get close enough to them. But anyway, this is an aperture priority camera. By mission of action, that's how it works. So it actually taught me some very, very useful lessons with regard to how aperture impacts shutter speed, and also the impact of aperture on depth of focus. Lessons that later in life were going to be incredibly useful to me, but I'm very pleased I've still got this camera. And it still works. The lenses are a little bit sticky. The aperture leaves, they close down, but then they take a very long time to open back up again. One day I'll actually get them replaced. But in 1998, I was living in Northamptonshire here in the UK, and I got into Formula One quite by accident. And in 1998, 1999, say that, easy for me to say, I had a go at capturing Formula One motorsport. Silverstone Circuit was 10 minutes up the road. I discovered that you could go to test sessions for free, and in those days there were anything up to, I don't know, a dozen or so a year. But trying to capture a Formula One motor car using a manual focus lens with only 210 millimeters of zoom to play with. Yeah, I gave up on that one pretty quickly. I'm not even sure I've got some of the original pictures I took with that camera, but I realized very quickly that technologically speaking, I was out of my depth. I did quite a bit of research, and I ended up with a Minolta Dynax 600 SI, a very, very nice camera. I actually regret selling that camera, and I also ended up with a Vivitar 100 to 400 millimeter lens, and that was my initial weapon of choice to try and capture Formula One. All the lessons learned from the Olympus with regard to aperture and focus and depth of focus and film speed, that all came into play, because I realized very, very quickly that in order to capture a Formula One car going very quickly, very sharply, I needed to have an exceptionally quick shutter speed. But here in the UK in March, it isn't exactly famed for being particularly bright. During the summer, no problem at all. So I was then having to cope with low light focus, which this cheap and nasty zoom lens didn't like. It used to hunt an awful lot. So what I had to get into the habit of doing was picking a point on the track, focusing on that point on the track, putting the lens into manual focus, and then track the vehicle round as it sort of flew around a corner or flew up a straight, in order to try and capture it sharp. And I went through a lot of films with that combination, trying to capture these things nice and sharp. My next leap was something that I stumbled into. So I'm still doing Formula One. I got pally with a chap that did it professionally, and he was using a Canon EOS 3, which was at the time, and I'm not sure it's technology that's been replicated, it had eye sensitive focusing. So as he was watching the car through his viewfinder, wherever his eye was looking, that was where the camera would focus. And I was wickedly impressed, because well, you know, as anybody that follows any form of motorsport will know, something can happen just like that, and the ability to be able to look at it and rely on the camera focusing where you're looking and then press the shutter was just, you know, it was gold. So I have to thank my wife for this, but she spotted a special offer and picked me up a Canon EOS 3 film camera still, by the way, and then to go with it I had an original Bigma. This is a Sigma 50 to 500 zoom lens. Absolutely cracking bit of kit that I used and used and used and used. In fact, just recently I went onto eBay to see whether I could get another EOS 3. I just loved it as a piece of technology, and I lived with that for another 2 to 3 years. Got to the point where started to build a website, and building a website was another turning point. So up to this point I'm scanning positives, so I'm scanning the prints from the films, and then eventually scanning the negatives as well. But the move to digital, or the move to a website, meant that what I wanted to do was go to a test session, come home in the evening and be able to upload straight away a report about what I had seen, some of the incidents that I'd seen, but then also have some pictures of it, which if you're then having to scan negatives, which can take quite a long time because you have to take out all the dust, and oh, it's a right old faff. I would never want to go back to doing that quickly ever again. That meant that, you know, I couldn't do it quickly. It would take me a couple of days by the time I'd scanned all the negatives, worked out which ones were good, cleaned them up, shrunk them down, and then uploaded them to the web. And bear in mind, we were on dial-up then, not broadband like you have today. And by chance, one of the chaps that I was friendly with had or bought a Canon D30, which I believe was Canon's first consumer digital camera. Now, I already had an EOS 3, so I already had Canon fit lenses, which kind of made the choice a good one. And the year that I bought my camera, and I can't remember which year it was, I'm afraid, I just had a tax refund. So I went and spent it on a Canon D30, which was just a phenomenal change in the way that I approached photography. Principally in that I could just bang the button until the memory card was full. Although in those days memory cards were very expensive, so you couldn't have loads and loads and loads of high capacity memory cards. You had to be choosy, which was where taking a series of pictures and then scrolling back through them and deleting the howlers became commonplace, until on a very wet test session I accidentally deleted the whole card. So I never did that again. I never deleted in the field, and I still don't today. I don't delete in the field because I'm paranoid about it. So I had a Canon D30 for, I don't know, about a year and a bit. I had the opportunity to upgrade to a Canon 10D. So this was 3 megapixels, which was fine for what I was doing on the internet. This was 6 megapixels. This was the Canon 10D. Which then meant I could start looking at doing some printing. I had done a few library exhibitions trying to sell images and prints of Formula One, and they didn't sell particularly well, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. There was a little bit of interest, but no, you couldn't make a living out of it, put it like that. And I actually joined a camera club. Specifically because, and this is when I'm still in Northamptonshire, specifically because I wanted to find out what else was out there in terms of photography subjects, how to approach them. And I distinctly remember one evening coming into the club. I think we were having a sort of a show and tell evening or something like that, and I had some prints of my Formula One images, and I remember one of the members saying to me that they were very nice images, Hugh, but I wouldn't hang them on my wall. And I actually took that feedback quite badly. I was quite hurt, actually. But with maybe older, slightly wiser eyes, I think I kind of get what this person was trying to tell me. And I think that one comment spurred me to look elsewhere at what else could I point a camera at that could maybe even potentially earn me a little bit of money, but be something that I was going to be interested in. That then pointed me at landscapes, and landscapes came about as a result of seeing a talk by a gentleman called Steve Gosling. Now, Steve came to talk to us about fine art flowers, and Steve at the time was doing greetings cards of flowers, but he was doing things like putting cling film over the lens or smearing the front of the lens with Vaseline to try and create sort of, dreamy halos and things like that. But the way Steve talked about it, I just latched on to his words. I think it's a bit like, and most people subscribe to this, you come across a person or a teacher in your life that has an influence on you, and Steve was like that for me with regard to what else could I point my camera at. And the way that the talk was done was that we had a talk in the evening, and then we all met up. I think the talk was on a Friday evening, and then we all met up the following day at a National Trust location to spend a day with Steve. And Steve encouraged us to look at objects in the landscape in a completely different way, to try and find an odd angle, an unusual angle, but try and retain something of what the object is, the flower or the fern or piece of concrete or a pillar or whatever it was. And it was a style and a genre of photography I'd never even touched before. But just that one day and the images that I created just encouraged me to look more. In fact, I went on quite a few of Steve's landscape photography workshops, but that then took me into the no longer do I want a crop sensor camera where a 50 to 500 millimeter lens, milliliters, actually is a lot longer. What I'm actually after now is full frame. And because I already had a collection of Canon lenses, it kind of seemed obvious to go for a Canon 5D. This is the original Canon 5D. I also invested in an f2.8 lens, first 2.8 lens that I'd had, which was the Sigma 120 to 300mm f2.8, a heavy piece of glass, but just such a sublime lens. And using this camera and Steve's workshops, I explored landscape photography. I will admit to you, my first landscape photography workshop was an absolute disaster. I have a very, very distinct memory of walking down to Derwentwater in Keswick by the theatre by the lake. There's a concrete ramp that comes down from the theatre down towards the lake. It's where all the rowing, the rowing boats that you can hire are pulled up on the beach, and the motor launches that take you across the lake. That's where they're all stationed. But I remember walking down that lake, and in fact I was with another participant, a Polish lady, and this lady, a lovely lass, but she immediately set her camera up and started to frame up compositions and started taking pictures. I was just stood there not knowing what the hell to do, not a clue. I was looking at this fantastic landscape in autumn as well. Anybody that's been to the Lake District in autumn will know what it looks like. Looking at this fantastically beautiful landscape, but not having a clue what to do, what to point my camera out. And even though I was there for 3 days, I will admit to you that the images that I took there were absolutely abysmal, especially when I look at what I create now. But clearly I learned some lessons because I kept going and attended quite a few other workshops. So I survived with a Canon 5D. In fact, I still had my 10D as well for quite a period of time. But I survived with that camera until 2014. And in 2014, it started to develop a few technical faults. It wasn't massive, it was more to do with sort of hot pixels on the sensor, which could just be cloned out. But I looked at getting the camera repaired and was advised that potentially it could start to get quite expensive. So the sensor would need replacing, the shutter might need replacing, the shutter curtain might need replacing. And the chap that I was speaking to in the shop said to me, look, rather than spend 600 odd quid getting this camera fixed, it might be better to put that 600 quid into a new camera system. And it just so happened that that conversation took place just before the photography show, or what used to be Focus on Imaging, at the NEC. Very long story short, did a bit of research and ended up going into the Olympus brand. This is not my original EM5. This is another EM5 that I purchased secondhand. I sold my original one. I don't know why, I probably needed to fund something else, but I've recently managed to pick up an EM5 Mark 1. The reason being, I love the flip up screen. I just love the simplicity of just being able to do that, and it's so solid and robust. Yes, you can do it with a flip out one, but it's so flimsy, and I've already broken one of them. So I have an EM5. I also went and purchased an EM1, which I didn't like because the long exposures were very grainy, so that didn't last very long. I also have in my kit, I haven't got it out, I also have an EM5 Mark II. My original EM5 I purchased with a 12 to 50 lens. In fact, this very 12 to 50 lens, which in 35mm terms is 24 to 100. It's not a particularly fast lens, but what I liked about it was it had a macro feature, which is very, very handy to have a range of zoom plus macro all in one lens. And I survived with an EM5 Mark 1 and this lens for 8 months. I packed all my Canon gear away into a cupboard and I just went out into the landscape with this. Taught me two things. It taught me that the Olympus system can do the things that I need it to do, and also at a fraction of the weight. It also simplified what I was doing, so no longer was I lugging around 4 or 5 big lenses. I could more or less do everything that I wanted to do with just one lens, and if that wasn't enough, then I had to use my feet. The other thing that it told me was all that Canon gear that I've got, including all these big lenses, that can all go, because this thing is actually going to do what I wanted to do out in the landscape. So it was after that I migrated to an EM1, which didn't last very long, as I said. When the EM5 Mark II came out, I did pick one of those up because it was a step up from the EM5 in terms of focus and noise control, and in fact that's my main vlogging camera when I'm out in the landscape. That's packed away somewhere. And then a couple of years ago I ended up with an EM1 Mark II, and this is fitted with the newer 12-100 zoom lens, which is that's my lens. That very rarely leaves the camera. It's such a versatile lens. The reason why I went with both the 5 and the 1 models is that they're all weather sealed, and so the EM5, that was a financial choice. The EM10 I think had just come out, but the EM10 isn't weather sealed. The EM1 was a little bit too expensive, so the 5 made the right choice. The EM1-2 is a step above the EM1. I can do long exposures on this and I don't get any issues with noise. It's built like a tank, but because I'm using the EM5-2 for my vlogging, if this one ever let me down in the field, then I would just swap and I would use the EM5-2. It just means I couldn't take any video footage, but hey, what does that matter? I also have the 40-150 Pro lens. I've also got the times 1.4, sorry, that sits on the back. That's on it right now. Very useful bit of kit because it just gives you a bit more reach. A lovely lens that I don't use very often, if I'm honest, but because it's 2.8, for things like bluebells, poppies, things like that, this is absolutely superb at picking out a single flower and then blurring everything else that's around it. And that is my kit journey. My landscape image journey has been influenced massively by Steve Gosling. Steve's approach is about trying to say something with the images that you take, trying to communicate an emotion, a thought, an idea, a suggestion. I have one of Steve's books. It's entitled Lensless Landscapes. Oh dear, that you just got reflection there, didn't you? There we go. All taken with a pinhole camera, a film pinhole camera, I should hasten to add. But it kind of encapsulates Steve's approach. All of his images communicate a message, a mood, a reaction, a suggestion. They all say something. And when I was doing Steve's workshops, I recognized that there were certain images that just worked for me and others that just didn't. And that begged the question, well, why does that happen? Why do some images work and not others? And I started to look at the work of other photographers and pick up the landscape photography of the yearbooks, and I'd have the same conversation with myself. Why does this image work? Why does it resonate with me so strongly? And largely it was because it triggered some kind of a reaction or a memory with me. And the next question, if you like, was, okay, so when I'm out in the landscape, how do I do that? How do I see a scene and realize that I've got some kind of connection? And then how do I distill that into an image? And that was a technique that I learned by going on Steve's workshops. Steve taught me how to recognize what was going on up here and what was going on in my heart was just as important as what I could actually see. In some respects, it's even more important. And the reason why I'm referring to this book is that there is a quote in this book, which, if I can find my glasses, I can read to you. So the quote is, Hugh, photograph what you feel as much as what you see. And that is very much what I try and do in the landscape. If I see something that catches my eye or appeals to me, the next question that I ask myself is, why? Why have I looked in that direction? What is it that's really caught my eye? What is it that I'm actually trying to say? On Steve's workshops, he talks, there's two questions that he talks about. Why am I taking this photograph? And what are the elements in the scene that interest me? Those are two questions that have driven everything that I point this camera at today and that camera at in the past. It's as clear and as simple as that. And there you have it. That is my landscape photography kit and picture story. I hope it's been interesting. I kind of feel as if it's gone on quite a long time, but I hope it's been interesting. And I hope that you can kind of see where I've come from, maybe where I'm going to, but certainly where I am right now. It is a process I absolutely love. I had no idea that photography for me would be so consuming, and once this lockdown is over, the first thing I'm going to do, first opportunity I get, is to get out into the landscape and enjoy being out with the camera. And I'll probably take rubbish pictures, but so what? It doesn't really matter, does it? It's just the act of being out there. So thank you once again for watching. I hope it's been interesting. Please do consider subscribing and clicking on the bell button down below so that you can keep an eye on what I'm up to. If you click the bell button, you'll then get notified, especially if you do bell button and then all, you'll get notified when I upload new content, which is roughly once a month at the moment. I just don't have the opportunities to get out more often than doing an upload once a month. Thank you once again. I hope you are all keeping well and keeping very safe. And until the next one, I shall see you again soon. Take care now.